Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review of the 1985 horror film Fright Night. Now, this is one of those films that I have a soft spot for because I used to watch it quite a bit whenever it came on cable when I was a kid, and it honestly is one of my favorites. But it isn't a film where it's a high quality movie just due to nostalgia. This is a fantastic film. I think this movie is aged like a fine wine. I think this film is easily one of the best horror films of the 1980s, and I also feel it's one of the best vampire movies out there. If not my personal favorite, after watching it again, it just reminded me of how much I love this movie, how much I love these characters, how much I love the look of the film, how much I love Tom Holland's direction, how much I love the visual effects and the makeup work, and the score by Brad Fiedel, and the soundtrack. It's just one of those movies that everything comes together in a perfect storm. And these are things that it's not an easy thing to pull off. In all honesty, this film does for vampires what Ghostbusters does for ghosts. It really does. I think that's a good comparison to make. Both films were released by Columbia Pictures. I think both films had effects work that were done by Richard Edlund. And overall, both films really had that great sense of not only camaraderie with the cast, but also a sense of thrills and fun that both felt equally genuine. It didn't feel like it was too scary. It didn't feel like it was too jokey or too comedic. It knew when to take itself seriously, but it also knew when to not take itself seriously, which I think a lot of horror films tend to struggle with that balance of levity and horror. And I think Fright Night is one of the best examples of how you do that particular balance right. So it's directed by Tom Holland, and for a directorial debut, this is absolutely phenomenal. It's really astonishing when you look at like a lot of people who just start off directing, they kind of start off with with a decent affair, but they don't really blow you away. This is the type of directing job that absolutely blows your socks off. Like, it really is that impressive. From the visuals to the camera techniques, there's so many great shots in this film. A lot of just really finely crafted, fine-tuned bits of direction. For one, there's a sequence in Charlie's bedroom when you first find out that that the vampire is in his bedroom, and it's this really great shot where you have a close-up of Charlie, I think like from the neck up, or from, maybe just from right here. And in the background, the vampire, Dandridge, is in his closet, and the door slowly opens, and he's back there, and he's slowly walking up towards the camera and towards Charlie, and Charlie doesn't know he's there, but the audience does. That just ratchets up the suspense in that sequence and just takes it to a whole other level. There's other sequences like that in terms of the direction, and there's also other scenes that are just really clever. There's a sequence where Dandridge is crawling along the side of the house near the end during the Fright Night, and the way that the camera angle was done was really cool. And then there's stuff that's really difficult to pull off, like the whole dance sequence at the nightclub where Dandridge is doing this incredibly sensuous dance with Amanda Bearse's character Amy. And in this particular sequence, it's very there's not only a lot of people that are in this club, but there's a lot of mirrors, and that's done intentionally so you can intercut sequences of what looks like Amanda Bearse just dancing with herself, because that's what it would look like, because vampires don't cast a reflection. So the sequence is really well done. It doesn't look goofy, it doesn't look silly, and that's something that it could easily appear that way if it's not handled properly. But instead, it's just absolutely mesmerizing. And it's not only just Tom Holland's direction in that scene that's just really impressive. It's also the editing. I mean, the editing throughout this entire movie by Kent Beta. I think Kent Beta deserves more credit than he gets. I think editors, period, deserve more credit for their work for classic films, or even films that aren't even classics, because editing is not easy. And it seems like it's kind of a thankless job. So I try to give editors credit when I can, because when there's excellent editing, it really does raise the film or any movie to a much higher level. And I feel that the editing in this, it's excellent. It's a really great film when it comes to the editing. It enhances sequences, it makes them more tense, and it makes them more suspenseful. It makes them, it even increases the thrills. Cannot say enough about the editing for this movie. And on another note, another unsung kind of hero for films, and honestly one of the most important parts of a successful film or a successful story, of course, is the story. And with films, it's the screenwriter that's responsible for a lot of the really key elements and key plot points and key aspects of the production. And this is another impressive job well done by Tom Holland, who did dual work. Not only did he direct this movie and did a absolutely dynamite job doing so, but he also wrote it. And you can tell throughout this entire film, when you watch it, that this has his fingerprints all over it, and more importantly, has his heart into it. He was really passionate about this project and this concept and this idea, something that he wanted to do, because he felt like the vampire genre was getting stale and needed a blood transfusion. So he thought that, hey, I'll be the guy to do that. I will bring the vampire genre into the contemporary 80s. And on top of that, I'll combine elements of The Boy Cried Wolf and other story elements into my story and create something that is unique. Despite the fact that it does have spins on old concepts, it still feels fresh and invigorating. And it really does. I think in a lot of ways, one of the main things that I think really makes this film work so well is definitely the characters. Charlie, Amy, Evil Ed, Peter Vincent, and even Jerry Dandridge, and even his friend and confidant and partner in crime, Billy Cole. Even he adds a lot of flair and intrigue to the film. And I think a lot of that is due to Holland, once again, being such a flexible director. Even for a first-time director, he was not rigid. He was like, hey, I want your input. I even want you guys to write up biographies for your characters so you get to know them better. And on top of that, he even casted guys like Gary Cole. Jonathan Stark to play, Gary Cole. That's he's not in this movie. But Jonathan Stark as Billy Cole. He even casted Jonathan Stark because Jonathan Stark actually wowed him with his comedic take for the role. And that just shows you how Tom Holland was just really with it. Like, he was really able to go with the flow when it comes to the film. And I love Jonathan Stark's performance. I think it's very different, and it's genuinely funny. And I think it really adds an extra ingredient to the film that really helps it. And not only that, I mean, there's all these other just really great characters. Jerry Dandridge is a excellent villain. He's charismatic. He's the type of guy that you could see why people fall for him and would wind up wanting to do his bidding. But he also has this intensity and this ferocity to his character that really stands out in a good way, especially for a horror film. Like, there were multiple scenes in this where I was downright terrified of this man. You know, I did not want to cross paths with Chris Sarandon's character in this movie, his vampire. But despite that, he still knows when to play up the role for laughs or to poke fun at things, and just makes the whole performance so wildly enjoyable to watch. And then you have a really good protagonist. You have a great antagonist in Jerry, and then you have an equally as great protagonist in Charlie Brewster, played by William Ragsdale, who I guess at one point they were the producers, they were actually auditioning Charlie Sheen, and they were considering Charlie Sheen for the role, but they eventually decided against Charlie Sheen because they felt he was too much of the prototypical hero. So they wanted the boy next door. They wanted the guy who you couldn't really necessarily buy as the hero. And I definitely think that was the right choice, because William Ragsdale, he really does play the role that he was born to play here. It's a really nice mix of Zach Galligan and Zach Galligan from Gremlins, and I'm trying to think of the other actor that I'm trying to. It's not coming to my mind right now, but the reason why I'm bringing up Zach Galligan is because he had that same sort of vibe about his character, about this particular person in Charlie, where you could buy that he's cool enough to be a protagonist for a story, but he's also nerdy enough and has enough flaws that you can really put yourself in his shoes. And I think that was intentional on Holland's part, and definitely when it comes to casting an actor like William Ragsdale. And I also think, you know, once again, I bring this up a lot, but I bring it up for a reason. Chemistry between a cast is paramount. It's really important. It really helps these characters come to life. And this is another movie that has great chemistry with everybody involved. And even in sequences where it feels like there isn't chemistry, there's still chemistry happening. It's just one of those things where the story is showing cracks. And I think those cracks is another really underrated aspect of this screenplay by Holland. I really love that about it. That you don't see a cliched group of friends here. You see strained relationships. You see Amy and Charlie, they both genuinely do love one another and have compassion for one another, but they don't have a whole lot of experience. And at the same time, they're drifting further and further apart. And a big chunk of the movie is them separated. And it's about Charlie trying to show her not only is there actually a vampire living next door to him, but that he does love her. And, you know, he does put her above a lot, pretty much anything else in his life. But at the moment, he's got his mind on this vampire that's living next door. And who wouldn't? I mean, if you saw what Charlie saw, like, you wouldn't want to let it go. You wouldn't want to let it go if you saw a vampire take a bite out of some woman's neck. You wouldn't. You'd be like, oh my god, what the fuck? Like, I've heard about some wild parties, but I've never heard about, real life vampires. I never heard about that kind of shit. I mean, maybe you could be like, oh, it was just a kink or whatever. But even then, I would still be curious, and I would still be doing a lot of the same things that Charlie does, where you're trying to be like, what the hell is going on here? And you really do sympathize with Charlie too when his friends split off from him, when his relationship with Amy is strained because he's focused on what's going on. Well, who wouldn't be focused on this? Yeah, I understand. We love each other. We had a spat. I'm sorry, but there's murders happening in our town. Women are showing up dead and missing with their heads gone. I saw a fucking vampire. That kind of stuff. Forgive me if teenage relationship struggles and problems is not on the first thing on my mind right now. But anyway, that's just I just wanted to mention that because that is something that definitely popped in there when I was watching the movie. But yeah, it's that different dynamic with the characters that really makes it stand out from a lot of these other movies of this particular type, because a lot of these films, everyone's tight knit, everybody's super close. There isn't a lot of cracks in the relationship. I mean, for instance, with Evil Ed, it doesn't even seem like he's really that close of a friend to Charlie or Amy. It's just one of those things where he's friends with them more out of necessity because he's a loner, and it's not necessarily, and he's a super big nerd, and it's not necessarily because they're super close. Evil Ed really did represent the kind of friend that I remember having in high school. The kind of friend that I'm not even close with anymore as an adult, because we never were really that close to begin with. So yeah, I really like that dynamic. I think it really does add a lot to the movie. And then, speaking of that dynamic, the dynamic between Peter Vincent and Charlie is similar in a way where it starts off very strained, and honestly, things are handled very realistically. When Charlie shows up and is talking to Peter Vincent and is trying to beg him to help him kill this vampire that lives next door to him, he's justifiably freaked out. And it takes a while for them to really build a bond and to really have some genuine chemistry and work together. And it's a natural thing. And it's really nice to see that. It just shows you how intelligent and how smart Holland is. And honestly, how strong these characters are as a result, because of how they are handled in a natural and really realistic way. It really makes them resonate deeper with the audience. And yeah, I loved the way that Peter Vincent was handled. I loved his arc. I loved how he started out as this sheepish, completely shy and easily spooked former horror star who's down on his luck, evicted from his home, lost his job hosting the Fright Night show on late night TV, and he gets thrust into this scenario, which is a real life vampire movie. And his reactions to what's going on and to what's happening is so well done, and one of the biggest reasons why is, once again, because it's handled in a realistic way. That at first he's absolutely terrified that he doesn't see a reflection in the mirror. He's absolutely horrified at what he's having to deal with when it comes to Evil Ed, when he comes and gives him a visit at his home. And then he still has his doubts when he goes with Charlie to try to stop Dandridge. So by the end of the movie. But there's this gradual, slow build of his character that is very endearing. And then at the same time, he still isn't perfect. And that's the imperfections of these characters. The imperfections of the screenplay really do make it shine. And that's not usually the case. It really isn't. Like, it's one of those rare instances where it not being perfect, it having dings, it having cracks with these characters and with their personas actually makes the film even better. But as good as the screenplay is, I mean, this film really would not work without the performances by the cast. And before I get to the cast members, I want to mention a couple more things about the screenplay. When it comes to the script, I like the fact it's a simple story. It deals with Charlie Brewster, who's a teenager. He loves horror films. He loves vampire movies. He's spending the night watching his favorite horror show, Fright Night, and he's also spending the night at the same time with his girlfriend, Amy, and he sees something strange out his bedroom window. He sees what looks like new neighbors carrying in a coffin into the house next door. And so understandably, he's spooked and curious. And so he eventually finds out one night that his next door neighbor is actually a legit, real vampire. And he goes through the normal motions of trying to call the police, or he actually tries to get his friends to believe him, but they think, he's crazy, or it's a joke. Or he doesn't even want to tell them that about it because he thinks that they're going to think he's lame or he has a screw loose, which is ultimately what happens. But he goes to the police because he sees that there were some women that he saw at his neighbor's house that wound up missing later and dead. So understandably, he calls the police, but he eventually cracks and admits and says that, that he's a vampire. And of course the police officer is like, "You're fucking crazy, and don't you ever call me again, otherwise I'm gonna arrest your ass." That detective was played by Art J. Evans, who was honestly really great in that role. So yeah, he calls the police, doesn't work, gets his friends on board, but they think that he's gone off the deep end and he wants to kill himself. Or it's a suicide mission of him trying to go after and try to kill Dandridge because it'll lead to him getting arrested and his life will be completely ruined. So they pay one of his idols and Peter Vincent to come in and help him. But there's other sort of things that happen with that. And then ultimately, Fright Night for real happens. And Charlie and Peter Vincent have to save Amy from the clutches of Peter Dinklage has to save Amy from the clutches of Jerry Dandridge, and also they have to fend off Evil Ed along the way, their former friend turned vampire, because he gets turned by Dandridge. And there's this romance thing going on between Amy and Jerry, because Amy looks like his long dead lover. And yeah, so it's I made it seem a little more complicated than it really is, but it isn't. It's very simple and straightforward and easy to follow. And that really helps the pacing, and it really does help the film rise to a very high level when it comes to this kind of fare. So anyway, yeah, we get to the cast. I mean, Chris Sarandon is Jerry Dandridge. one of the best performances of his career easily. Like I said, he's just so charismatic. He's so likable, despite the fact that he's a genuinely intimidating and scary vampire you would not want to meet in a dark alley. But he had a sardonic wit and sense of humor about him that was very refreshing when it comes to a vampire on film. William Ragsdale was a great everyman. Amanda Bearse, she played a good vulnerable virgin who wants the best for her friends, and she genuinely has feelings for Charlie, but she's getting tired of waiting for him. And so you could see how she gets honestly put in a trance by Jerry, and has this own inner turmoil and battle and struggle that she deals with. And she's also has her own self-confidence issues, just like Charlie. It seems like a lot of people in this movie have issues with their self-confidence. Evil Ed, Amy, Charlie, Peter Vincent. And what helps them regain confidence, at least in the case of Charlie, Vincent, and Amy, is this confrontation with this Prince of Darkness of the 1980s, who looks like the yuppie, the businessman who you would see wearing a fancy Armani suit, that kind of thing. But yeah, just really great performances by everybody involved, especially Amanda Bearse when it comes to the moment when she is a vampire. I thought she really went all out with it, and it was very uncomfortable for her with the contact lenses that were painful, and the facial prosthetic, which and I'll get to talking about that when I get to talking about the effects. But yeah, Amanda Bearse, and it's a role that, it's one of those things where this is what I remember her for. So when I saw her in Married with Children, I was like, who is this? Like, Marcy in Married with Children is a complete opposite of this character that she plays in Fright Night. It's honestly kind of hard to believe it's the same actress. But yeah, Roddy McDowall, one of his, honestly, my favorite role of his is Peter Vincent. I really absolutely adore this performance by Roddy McDowall. He seems like a very kind old man, a very likable guy who just got dealt a bad hand, and he seems like one of those actors who, yeah, he knows he's a has-been, but you know what? He realizes that that's better than being a nobody, but at the same time, it's got to hurt that he doesn't really have much of a career and isn't really, making ends meet as much as he would like to. And of course, he has these initial assumptions about anyone that comes up to him that they just want his autograph. And I thought that really was quite tragic, but at the same time, very realistic, because that's how it is for a lot of celebrities. A lot of these film fans, these fanatics, they just want one thing. They just want an autograph. And so when there are differences to the norm, it definitely is something that stands out to these actors. But that's just one aspect of the performance that I thought really worked. I thought there's just so many believable moments of characterization when it comes to his role as Peter Vincent. When it comes to his fear, when it comes to his shock, when it comes to his awe, the whole way that he reacts to Evil Ed just made that entire sequence so gut-wrenching to watch. And speaking of gut-wrenching, that is a great way to put the death scenes in this movie. It definitely does push the R rating when it comes to these death scenes. And not just because of the gore and the goop and the guts and the spectacle, but because of the way that it's handled. It's played straight. And it's, in the case of Evil Ed and uh, Jonathan Stark's character, Billy, these death scenes are just rough. But that's a big reason why they work so well, because they really hammer you emotionally. Even though, these are characters who are flawed, who are every bit as responsible for their own demise as anyone else, but it's still one of those things where it's just so rough and brutal to watch. I mean, Cole just freaking melts painfully, and then essentially turns into dust, and nothing's left behind other than a skeleton, really a skull. And then with Evil Ed, he gets impaled in the chest when he's in wolf form, and then he slowly, painfully turns back into human form, and he's screaming in pain and in agony, and he's crying, and then he dies. And it's such a unique take on these kind of death scenes in a vampire movie, because a lot of time in these death scenes, you don't really see the horror of that, or necessarily all of the tragedy of that, because it's just over so quickly. They get stabbed in the chest, and then they're decapitated, or this or that. But in Fright Night, it has these really long, laborious shots that really just ratchet up and ramp up the intensity of the emotions, and make these sequences gut-wrenching and brutal to watch. But at the same time, despite that, so effective and so great. So yeah, I mean, I can't sing enough praises about that kind of stuff. But speaking of praise, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the visual effects. I think Boss Films worked on some aspects of it, and I don't know precisely exactly who it was that did all of the makeup effects, but I think Robert Short might have done a few things. But I think there was a main... I'm going to look up the makeup effects artist, because I want to give the makeup effects artist their proper credit for their work for this movie, because it is honestly some of the most impressive and great examples of vampire makeup that honestly exists. It really is that good. Steve Neal worked on this. He's done a lot of stuff. Richard Edlund was involved. Trying to see who is the Mark Brian Wilson. He worked on a bunch of stuff as well. I don't know why we don't have like special makeup department, special effects makeup artist, uncredited work by Dale Brady, Bill Sturgeon. It seems like Boss Films, it seems like they did a lot of the makeup effects and stuff. Like Steve Johnson. There we go. Steve Johnson. He was a creature designer. He worked on this. I think Steve Johnson, I think he incorporated some of the effects techniques that he used for this into stuff like Night of the Demons. But yeah, anyway, Steve Johnson, he's a legend in the business, so it's not surprising at all that he worked on this too. I love the look of the vampires in this, from their contact lenses, which actually had specks of glitter in them that were all different kinds of colors, and specifically like the teeth. They were, and that was another thing that was very unique and different about this movie. And there's a lot of films after Fright Night that just ripped it off and just copied it verbatim, and I get it, because it's a really striking visual of like these teeth that are more jagged, and you don't just have two sharp teeth, you have more than one. And on top of that, just some really ingenious, cool stuff, like when Dandridge turns into a bat form. And speaking of that bat form, a part of that design was actually repurposed from the original design for the Library Ghost in Ghostbusters, because the Library Ghost design was the original design was deemed to be too intense. It was deemed to be too scary for a PG film. So they incorporated elements from that design into the design for the Bat Monster, which I thought was pretty cool. And then there's other stuff too, like the climax when Dandridge is getting exposed to all these different blasts of sunlight, and that's another thing that I got to give Holland a lot of kudos for, is how he handled the climax. I love the way that that's set up with the various different sequences where Peter and Charlie are smashing windows, and Jerry has to try to stay in one part of the room that doesn't have light in it. It's a really, and then at the same time they also have to try to stay away from the transformed Amy who's trying to go after them. And speaking of the transformed Amy, the prosthetic makeup effect of her vampire mouth, which is just like this, just rows and rows of teeth, and this really just very creepy a grin on her face, almost like a Cheshire cat. I really love that design. And yeah, and then the finale where Jerry, he explodes and he actually turns into the bat form, and it's just a really great looking effect. Some really great makeup and animatronics work. $1 million well spent when it comes to the effects for this film. But I mean, I'm not done talking about the things about Fright Night that are fantastic. I mean, let's talk about the score by Brad Fiedel, which apparently Tom got Brad because he was a big fan of the Terminator. I'm really glad he got him, because I think Brad is honestly an underrated composer. He gets his credit for the Terminator, but I don't think he gets enough credit, because I think he's a much more versatile composer than he's given credit for by a lot of different people. And as much as I like the score for the Terminator, mainly I only really like the main theme. I like his score for this more. I think it's a better score overall in terms of the variety of different compositions. And his piece Come to Me is just haunting and just really memorable and great. And the songs on the soundtrack are also a lot of fun, and also add a lot to the movie in terms of the overall atmosphere and the vibe of the film. And then you got great production and art design. I love the way that the certain sequences are shot in terms of the lighting, the house at the end, Jandridge's house with the fog rolling off. I love that shot. I love the fact that when you go inside of the house, you see a staircase right away, and then there's like this stained glass window at the top of the staircase. So there's a lot of just great eye candy in this movie, not only from the perspective of visual or practical makeup effects, but from production and art design. And even, little subtle things, like, for instance, Charlie's car, which doesn't even have a full paint job. I thought that was something that was a nice little fun quirk to add to the film and to his character. And there are just so many little things and so many moments. The nightclub sequence, just love the way that that's shot and the way that it's edited. And there's just a lot of things to love about Fright Night. And even lines of dialogue. I love how Chris Sarandon introduces himself on the Fright Night, where he's like, "Welcome to Fright Night. For real." I love the way that he does it. And then there's other stuff too, of course. "You're so cool, Brewster." But yeah, I really, I love this film. It's one of those movies that I could watch over and over again and never get tired of it. It goes by at a really rollicking pace for the most part. But I have to admit, as much as I love this movie, I do have like a couple problems. For one, I think Evil Ed, when it comes to his turn as a vampire, I think the film should have had more sequences, or at least one scene, that actually shows him getting bullied. because a lot of it is just assumptions, and I get it and I understand, but I think that would have made his turn more compelling. It would have made it seem a little bit less random. Also, I would have cut a little bit of the stuff with Amy and Jerry down a bit. Apparently, this was a idea by Chris Sarandon. He was the one that came up with this concept that of the fact that Amy looks a lot like his lost lover or whatever. And he did it to add more of a dynamic to his character, and I'm fine with that. It just kind of hurts the pacing a little bit as the film starts to move away from its main plot and tries to go into that for a little bit. Because for the first hour or so, it goes by at a breakneck pace, and then it really comes to a little bit of a halt at that moment. That being said, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily 100% problematic. I like it. I just think things could have been trimmed down a little bit. And then the ending, I don't like the ending. I don't know what that is. It's a lazy sequel bait ending where Evil Ed is still alive. It makes no sense. And it also hurts the impact of Evil Ed's death scene. So I don't think that was necessary. And I don't really care for that. If we're going to talk about the one thing that I don't like about Fright Night at all, it's the sequel bait ending. Now, it could have been even worse because originally the ending was going to have Peter Vincent be a vampire, which that would have been even worse than Evil Ed being mysteriously alive. So I'm glad they at least went with that route. I guess it was the lesser of two evils in that particular instance. There's a lot of interesting stuff about the original screenplay and about things that were cut out that you would ultimately hear about through not only the screenplay itself, but also the novelization, which I do have, and it's a good read. I do recommend it if you're a fan of the film. There's some interesting stuff like Peter Vincent's real name that you get from the novelization, as well as the fact that Amy kept her vampire boobs. I guess like she kept her her bigger breasts, and they're like super like sensitive because they're vampire boobs. I don't understand that, but okay. That would have been an interesting thing to explore in the film. I'm glad they didn't, because it just kind of would have seemed a little bit weird. But in all honesty, it's not a little bit. It's just weird. But I thought it was worth mentioning because it's a vampire boobs. Like, I guess that's a thing. But anyway, yeah. I mean, you don't necessarily grow long red hair either, I guess. So, I mean, there's a lot of, kind of things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me that she had vampire boobs. She lost her vampire hair, but she still has the vampire tits. Anyway, I'm rambling now. It's over 40-something minutes. But like I said, it's a movie I love. It's a film that I really, really enjoy. And I wanted to talk about every single thing, every single aspect, everything that I possibly could, and give it all of the praise, all of the credit, because I think it deserves it. I think it's like I said, I think it's a classic, and I know I'm not the only one, and it deserves its cult following and then some. The $24.9 million in the box office is not enough. I think it should have done even better. Even though it still did well. It did a lot better than the studio thought. The studio was putting in so much money into trying to make Perfect, the movie with John Travolta and Jamie Lee Curtis, that nobody fucking remembers, a hit. And it was a massive bomb. And rightfully so, because it sucked. And it was far from perfect. But this is a film that found its audience, and there were a lot of things that people wanted to sink their teeth into again and again. And it's just one of those movies that really does stand the test of time. And I just think that you can't really do better than this. And that's why the remake, that's another reason why the remake is so bad. Because it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're not going to come even close to being on the same level as this movie, because this is as close to perfection or lightning as in a bottle as you can get with this kind of genre and with this kind of film. So you really should not even bother. But you should definitely bother checking this film out sometime. Or watch it again if you haven't seen it in a long time, because it's definitely worth it. And this is a Blu-ray. This is a great release by Eureka. It's region free, so don't be too freaked out by the 18 mark on it. And it features a edited version of You're So Cool, Brewster, that doesn't feature the Fright Night Part 2 stuff. But that's still a really extensive special feature and a great transfer. Easily the best the film has ever looked or sounded. But anyway, that's my long, in-depth thoughts on Fright Night. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.